All right, let's get into it. Okay, welcome to Theorycraft, a live podcast where game developers and their players engage in conversation. It's been another 2 weeks, and this time we are joined by a special return to the hosting chair for good, or for as long as he'll want to be here. Kevin, it's really good to see you again, man. I loved having you back on for John, and I just want to hear everything about what you've been up to, and I'm sure everybody else does too.
How are you? Yeah, great to be back.
Yeah, man.
What have I been up to? Been working, a lot of life stuff. Nobody cares about that. So let's talk about what games I've been playing. Let's see. I did play Elden Ring. We can talk about that a little bit. But I've also enjoyed a couple of very recent games. 2 that were in the turn-based strategy section. The new King Arthur game, Knight's Tale, I was enjoying that quite a bit. And then also the Warhammer 40k version of XCOM, Chaos Gate Demon Hunters, that just came out. Has also been very enjoyable. And then another shout out to like an adorable, I have to call it adorable because it is just tiny. It's called Stacklands. It's a very different type of game. And it's from a company that basically just does, they release it's a small group and they release like a game a month. They're just like these little games, these little indie games. And Stacklands hit, it was one that just really caught people's attention. And so now they're going to double back around on it and add some more content to it and develop it a little further. Yeah, check it out. It's on Steam. It's super cheap.
Yeah, I just linked it. It's really striking in it gives me kind of Baba Is You vibes. It has a very prototype look to it, but intentionally finished in that style, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the part
it plays
that they
like solitaire, you just move cards around and stack cards on other cards so that everybody knows how to play it. It's just, but there's some depth to it that you have to strategize, and economy of motion becomes a thing because there's a timer on there, and it plays really quickly and it doesn't last forever, but it was super engaging. So I'm actually legitimately excited about them adding more content. Should be fun.
Yeah, I'm watching the autoplay kind of developer teaser video that plays on the page of I guess the 4 gentlemen from Sock Pop. They look like they're having a really freaking good time. They crank a game out every single month.
Yeah, I was reading a little bit about their process, and yeah, it sounds like they have a pretty accelerated rate of just dropping out little tiny games.
I wonder how they're financed.
They're almost
it's just like
game
permanent game jams. Yeah, totally.
Right.
And they sell their stuff on itch.io. Man, this looks like a blast.
Yeah, it's really simple, but there's some depth to it and some really clever ideas in there. And there's another game that was similar to it, or at least a while back, called Cultist Simulator. And that one was also very different from most games people play. And I found that to be really, really interesting and fun.
How so?
So I got sucked back into that as well. So it's very similar in that you just kind of stack cards together to make things happen. But there's a time pressure on it, and you're trying to basically form a cult and explore the mysteries of this world and the other worlds in order to do some big ritual and win, ascend essentially. And within that basic structure, there's all kinds of events and pressures and going on, and you have to feed yourself, so you have to work part-time, and otherwise you'll start starving, and then that will create hardship. And so it's got a bit of a survival element, but you're also trying to press into the unknown, and really fascinating. But it's just played very differently. I'd never played a game like that. I've played card games in the past, but it's always you have a hand and you play a card and it goes on the board and it affects the board, and other people play cards on cards and things like that. But this one was all about just moving cards around and having them interact with each other, which creates additional cards, which then have interactions with other cards. And so the whole thing was this fun exploration of what happens when I do this. What happens when I combine these 2 cards? All kinds of crazy stuff happens. So
yeah, this
is very different, very cool.
Yeah, I just posted a little snippet. They advertise that the game has new tutorial, and you're supposed to be figuring it out, and that's part of the challenge. Is it genre-wise? Is it kind of like a roguelike? Do you do runs? I just feel like I'm picking up on a lot of that vocabulary. This looks like something I would get obsessed with.
But the runs are pretty long. Like Cultist Simulator, you could have runs that last 10 hours or more. So,
and then you just die.
Yeah, and then if you screw up, like you're spinning all these plates, and if you let one of them fall, you die, and it's like start over, son. So yeah, very roguelike in that sense. But I feel like most roguelikes are designed to be played in small. Like you die in the first hour, right?
Right.
And then you restart, and then a really good run, which is rare, would last maybe 2-3 hours, like your typical FTL sort of experience. But this one is like much longer. Yeah, really, really interesting, really compelling. The world and the story and the interactions and like all the lore is done by the guys who did Sunless Sky and
Sunless
Sunless
Sea.
Seas.
Yeah. Dude, I totally I get that energy from scrolling through this page as well, and just reading how Rock Paper Shotgun like rapturously describes the occult and how the elements of Lovecraftian horror are woven into it, and it's 1920s and high society. I mean, like narratively, this seems like something I would want to chill out in for a very long time. Is it stressful feeling with these?
At times, but you can pause at any time, right? Like you can pause the game and think, but execution is where you have to be sort of quick on your feet. So yeah, like if you get stressed out, you can definitely pause and breathe and think about your next move and resort your priorities and that kind of thing. But once you start the game back up, you got to do things in the right order.
Yeah, this is probably this. I mean, this could be a nice little fix after finishing Inscription earlier this year and before the next game like that blows my mind comes out. I'm so surprised I haven't heard about this. It looks like it's already like 4 years old.
Yeah,
seems like it might be a bit of a cultist classic.
That's right.
Okay, so you are really going wide with sampling a ton of different stuff lately.
Yeah, as usual.
Sure. Well, as usual for you, I don't tend to play games that way, and this is something that like maybe we'll get a YouTube comment talking about the long intro tangent, but I think this is sort of moving into like game designer patterns of thought, main topic territory. Like, do you? I mean, you're always playing and going quite wide and experimenting. I tend to just sort of like tunnel into games and want to squeeze every drop out of them, and then maybe even don't play anything for like a month afterwards until something else comes along. Like, how do you surface all the new stuff that you want to check out, especially things like this? Are you using like the Steam queue, or do you have like a pocket of devs you're just taking recs from, or are you just reading at all hours of the day?
Yeah, it's mostly Steam queue, but I spend some time on Twitch as well. There's a few developers a few streamers on Twitch that go through games really quickly, and they stream all the time. They're probably in this space where like developers are always sending them keys to get exposure, right? And so they just have every option available to them, and then they play it until they get sick of it or move on to something else. And so I sort of get to see what's grabbing people's attention, in that just by watching some streamers, or not even watching them, just seeing them on Twitch and what they're playing. I'll be like, "Ooh, I haven't heard of that game. Let me see what that is." For example, Vampire Survivors. Like, I haven't played that, but that's going around Twitch right now, for a lot of people. And it's this little $3 game that is really grabbing people. So I would have never heard of this game unless I had seen like several of the Twitch people that I follow like happen to be playing it right in the first like week that it was out. So that's another way I just get visibility on, hot new things sort of thing. But like I'm always looking for something interesting. And then I feel the need to complete games a lot less. I used to be really obsessive about that. Yeah. Like it used to be television shows too. I'd start a television show and I'd be like, well, I have to see how this ends. I hate it, but I have to watch 4 seasons now because I can't not finish it. Right?
Totally. Yeah.
But now as I've gotten older, right, I've broken that terrible cycle, right? So now I can put a show down when it sucks in the first 20 minutes, right? Now I can put a book down if I don't like it. Now I can put a game down if it's, I feel like either it's not captivating me or I sort of know what it's all about in the first, few hours. And then I can just go, okay, cool, interesting. I saw what they're going to do. And now I can put it down. I don't have to keep playing it. I've gotten better about that. And that means I can sample a lot more things.
That it does seem to be a mark of growing older and just kind of like marking time spent on filling up bars that don't really maybe mean quite as much. I just intrinsically wanted to do that when I was younger, and now it feels like...
Absolutely.
I'm getting a soft nudge from one of our other hosts to steer us back into the land of the relevant. There's been a good bit of news since last week. I don't know where you want to start, Chris.
I guess we could maybe talk about, well, let's just talk about the Warcraft mobile project real quick.
Yeah, Arclight Rumble.
Yeah, Arclight Rumble, yeah. Which I thought was clever because at first I was like, why did they put Arclight in there? Why didn't they just call it Warcraft Rumble? That seems like a better name to me, but I think it's because of the acronym of war, WAR, right? And so I think that makes sense. I think it's interesting. And then I was thinking wow, it's just such a thing with games these days where it's almost you have to care more about the acronym than about title. You know what I mean?
I was going to say it's a pretty bad choice to make the title bad so that the acronym works. But
yeah, I was talking to another founder today about his game, and he's trying to find a name for it. And I was like, you should try to do POG.
Right.
Just, your game could just be called Poggers, right? So I don't know. That's kind of funny, but my kind of thoughts with it was just that it just feels like a Clash, where it was a Clash Royale or it's Clash Royale, right? Kind of it's very similar to Clash Royale. It's like a Warcraft plus Clash with some changes, I'm sure. I think what you do is you can move the screen left and right to see a larger map, which I saw some grumbling on Twitter from Supercell people oh, LOL, that's not a good idea, that they discovered in R&D, because the mobile player hates moving the screen back and forth like that. And it kind of makes sense to me. So I thought that was interesting. I kind of think it's interesting because Supercell's kind of sunsetted Clash, right? They're kind of moving on to different other things, which is then it's interesting. Blizzard's here it is. It's our mobile first mobile game. It's this game that you played 10 years ago, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And then I was also listening to this other podcast called Deconstructor of Fun. And it's basically a bunch of
favorite.
It's a bunch of biz dev analysts who in the game industry, and they were thinking the monetization strategy was stupid and they couldn't believe what's going on. I don't know if that's true, but the kind of thing with Blizzard is just that they're trying to make free-to-play kind of service mobile games, which is a certain type of business, and it's very formulaic and very kind of, there's a whole thing about user acquisition that translates into revenue and all these things. It's almost like a formula, right? Whereas in comparison to PC console gaming, it's very different. The player, you can't just pay money to put advertising on the prod out there, and it's going to translate to users and translate to revenue. It's not that straightforward. The players are very savvy about which games they play, and they use streamers to find out if it's worth playing. It's very complicated. Mobile is very different. It's a whole different beast. And I get the sense that Blizzard is just making this game, but then they're also trying to change the monetization strategy to be something more conducive that they would want to play a mobile game for, right? Which I think makes sense. They don't want to be super predatory with the monetization or whatever. They have a new vision with it, okay? But it's untested, and you can try to make a mobile game best you can. For me, doesn't mean I'm going to play it, because I don't really play mobile games. You know what I mean? And so they're trying to make a game for somebody who may not exist, and I think that's a risk, right? And so, I thought the kind of art was charming. I liked the cinematic. I didn't like the developer kind of video. I thought it was kind of cringy, actually. I think it's hard to do that and the kind of tone that they were going for. It's hard to do that. Yeah, what did you guys think?
Yeah, so I kept waiting throughout, because just to talk about the cringy thing, it did seem like they were trying to make up for the fact that there wasn't a lot to show in the game. You know what I mean? By making a spectacle of the announcement rather than showcasing the game. Traditionally, Blizzard games spoke for themselves, right? They did most of the talking, because you would look at them and be like, oh my God, that looks amazing. The cinematic is amazing. The gameplay you're seeing looks amazing. Various things that they would show would get you excited. But when I was watching this, there wasn't that much there. I didn't see the thing that was going to separate this from all the other games out there, more specifically Clash Royale. There wasn't anything that they were if Blizzard was take not inventing genres, but take existing genres and perfecting them with certain master strokes. You didn't really see that in this. There was no there wasn't a reveal on this is how we've taken Clash Royale and hit it out of the park.
Right. Yeah.
And so I just felt really underwhelmed by this. Looks very standard. This looks very expected. This looks very just meh. And then they put on a spectacle with the chaos counter and, being super goofy and like trying to get us more excited than the product had reason to be excited about. And like all the Warcraft stuff was in there, and we all love Warcraft. So, right. Like,
I had this conversation with some people. I was like, so, what sets this thing apart or whatever?
Yeah.
And, most people would tell me, well, it's Blizzard, it's Warcraft. That's why it's going to be successful. And I'm like, maybe, but I mean, I'm like, maybe, but I'm on mobile. But I'm on mobile. And then the other thing is like over time, and I agree, like the IP of Warcraft and the IPs that Blizzard has are very lucrative and very important and can just command audiences just from its history and a reference of that. I agree. But I think that is like decaying over time, and that player base, people who understand Warcraft and like it are aging. I think the average age of somebody who really knows Warcraft, I don't think a lot of teenagers really do. I think it's a lot of people my age, mid 30s, late 30s, that sort of, and older, right? So,
and we also know that that's just not enough. Like, how many Star Wars games have failed miserably? So it's just not enough.
Yeah, no, I know. It's really the IP gets you in the door, but then it's not going to be enough to be $1 billion property on its own. You gotta have a good game too. You can't avoid making a good game, right? And so, but that said, I haven't played it. I've heard some things from people who have, and it wasn't. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
So that's what's just struck me is that it didn't come with it that Blizzard feel of like, this is what we're doing that's different and exciting. This is why you should be excited. So I missed that.
I think Immortal will have a lot more of that. I feel like in exploring Immortal, you'll get a better sense of like, oh, this is what happens when Blizzard approaches a mobile title and really like grinds on it for a couple of years. I just get the sense that there's a lot more sort of depth to it, and it'll probably be more fun to play. And it also feels much more contemporary. Like a Clash clone like this, skinned with the Warcraft IP, like seeing this video, and this is not to like slander the art style or anything like that. I just feel like if I saw a real rough version of this in like a company game jam in like 2018, I'd be like, oh, this is rad. We should do this. And I can't wait for us to do this, like contingent upon it releasing within like a year, maybe 2 years. But like it's now 2022, and like kudos to them for finishing it. But as we know, we are well past the point of Blizzard just being able to release anything and people buying it by the millions. And the mobile marketplace is like its own total beast. Activision already has it pretty well covered, on the King side in their portfolio. And so it just feels like an audacious kind of like pet project to just really want to show that like, hey, we get mobile and we can do mobile too. But, I worked at PopCap for a couple of years, and I am no mobile veteran, but that market is just like famously brutal. I mean, attention spans are so much worse than anywhere else. The platform influences the decisions that need to be made in terms of genre, pacing, download size, UX at every checkpoint. I mean, it's the land of data. It's completely driven by telemetry.
Yep.
It just feels like a strange space for Blizzard to, really be interested in going. Like,
and also all of those things compromise design.
And when you fail, you just absolutely fucking disappear is kind of the sad part. Like everything Blizzard releases does, will even at its worst get a write-up because we're just in the era of roasting it. But
nobody wants to talk about Warcraft 3 Reforged,
I know,
but we're forced to. It's a Blizzard thing.
I don't know. Who knows how it's going to do? I'm thinking it will probably be kind of inconsequential in the long term. I don't really think the cringe video is going to, echo throughout history. I mean, the reputation is what it is already. One more video is not a big deal. I don't think it's going to ruin the prospects of Diablo Immortal because the people are going to be looking for different things. They're not, and So the idea of somebody who is aware of Blizzard and their reputation and Warcraft, but is not satisfied with existing Warcraft offerings on mobile, that then plays it, but is willing to give like, I just don't know exactly who this player is. I think, some people have said like 35-year-old dads that don't have time anymore, but like, I mean, I'm fucking 38 and like, I don't really want to carry around a burning hot mobile phone all day, like.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah.
We'll
I mean,
see.
I'm glad
I hope
it got
that it
out,
does well. I think the company needs a win. I think ultimately, I do think diversifying into mobile makes sense, and I think
it does.
I think that is fine. My only critique is the project. I think has like been in development for over 5 years. It's just a long time for a mobile project. And I think it's odd timing. I think just because of where Clash is at now and how the market is shifting and stuff. But we'll see. We'll see. Anyways, moving on. The other thing, crypto is dead. I think the last week has been insane. Crypto FUD is what they call it. FUD is like fear, uncertainty, denial of basically crypto's existence. Let's say, I don't know, but I noticed like today, like one of the Yuga Labs apes or whatever, which is bought for millions of dollars, only went for a few hundred now. All the different coins are kind of crashing. All the different crypto startups are struggling to get funding. So it's pretty wild. I mean, in general, the economy, I mean, we're theming forward a full-fledged recession right now. So basically, the market is down, everything is down. But I think in general, since crypto basically is so reliant on right now kind of really venture capital or basically whales to fund it, who are basically now shifting their money into cash to weather out this recession. It'll be interesting
off
to see.
First. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it is the frothiest of the markets, and so it kind of makes sense that it would go down first as people start kind of tightening up. I think I
noticed Axie Infinity is like really, really down now. Like everything is it's a bloodbath. I try to avoid looking at it. It's just so bad.
Really, your Axies aren't doing too well?
I don't have any Axies, unfortunately. But if I did, I'd be nervous. But so I don't know. It's crazy how quick it could turn. Last week there was some Yuga Labs land sale thing that just blew up Ethereum, and the gas prices were crazy, and that was a huge thing. And now it's just Funville now with crypto. So I don't know. It will be interesting to see. And I think also this is also a story in general of the recession and how they'll affect companies. I'm a startup and we have to get future rounds of funding. So it's something on my mind, of course. I think strong companies will still be fine, but definitely there is going to be some other companies that may fold because they're not going to be able to get funding or that sort of thing. And that's going to suck. And, I'm also hearing whispers of larger gaming companies thinking about consolidation things. And, there's a website called layoffs.fyi or something like that that's tracking all the layoffs that are happening now. It's going to be rough.
Yeah. Y'all were obviously working in games in 2008 when the last recession kind of went down. And I mean, maybe we're actually headed into one. Seems like we are, but if you want to start Googling anything on how the game industry reacts to the recession, you can find an article per year because the last couple of years have been pretty exuberant. We started this podcast in the middle of the most white hot time of fucking investment capital flying around probably in recent memory, right? Noto came out of that. There's been acquisitions like every other month or two. And it is shocking how quickly it seemed to kind of start drawing back down. And it's making me want to think of, the last time I was in the recession and how the games industry does. And I was laid off during the 2008 recession. I was not particularly performing well, but we had most of the company go away shortly after the recession. And I think it had very little to do with the actual recession and more. It's just that it becomes a very convenient excuse to just shuffle folks out the door.
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah.
So that's what I was going to say. People, I think there's this perception that the game industry is recession-proof to a degree because, I guess we're just all going to stay at home and eat rice and beans and play games just like we did during COVID. It was the same story, but layoffs definitely tend to happen. And it's so weird that they, I mean, I heard you kind of nodding in agreement before. The idea is that like when there's this recessionary language around, it becomes okay to do layoffs, even though there were layoffs that probably like needed to happen even in better times. It's just weird to me sometimes that companies will like kind of wait for like the aegis of, well, the economy's turning down to do it. Like I kind of wonder why they don't just do it and like let people go. Like, do they really need like a huge narrative to make themselves feel better about it? I mean, who's really judging these guys? You know, they can do a layoff whenever they want.
What's interesting that you say there is, like gaming has always been, from an entertainment value standpoint, time per dollar spent has always been amazing compared to almost anything else. Going to the movies, going out to drink with your friends, right? Whatever it is, the value has just always been tremendous. So, you know, as people hit recessions, I feel like it may just drive people into gaming more, as it could always have done.
I think
in lieu of other types of entertainment, right?
No, I think that trend that's a real thing, and that is the benefit. That is the benefit that.
But it's interesting that there's no correlation between that and companies developing, right? Like, because then you're seeing on the other side layoffs and no venture capital, and everybody tightening the purse strings, and it fascinates me.
Yeah. So I mean this is going to be a continued story we're going to talk about. I'm sure this whole year, but. Yeah, so there's that. And then what was the last thing we were talking about?
Well, this is kind of on topic. It struck me that fucking Square is selling fully 3 development studios, 4 really large IP, and I guess like 50 other miscellaneous IP to the Embracer Group for like a paltry $300 million. I mean, in the era of, like 60-something billion dollar acquisitions, $300 million is like, on the 1,000th scale. I'm not a mathematician, but I can't believe they're letting all these properties go for so cheap. It really does. And okay, so the news around this was
properties are. Remind us what all the properties are.
Tomb Raider, Deus Ex. They're keeping Outriders. They're keeping Just Cause, I think, and they're keeping Life is Strange. But I
haven't looked into it at all. But is that what's happening, or are they leasing them? Because the take I heard was that you let other companies make a game with that IP within the next 2 years because they don't intend to, but then they still have because they have to make a game in order to keep it, and they don't intend to, so you sort of lease it out and say you make a game in it, and then we'll get the license back when we're ready to make the next big one.
I
heard that might be what's happening, but I haven't researched it, so I don't know.
That's not how I interpreted it, but just to play that out, say, because there are 3 studios that seem like they're actually changing hands here too. So it's not like those studios are on loan and going back to Square afterwards. Say a bunch of folks, the Embracer Group feels like they can put some wind in the sails of a new Deus Ex title or something like that. I don't see Square 3 years from now deciding that they want to start getting back into that again. I feel like they've done nothing but kind of push away and denigrate their own sort of like foreign developed properties for the last like 9 years.
Right.
Like the saga of Square has been every one of these games that comes out. There's a Kotaku article where somebody comments on how sales were disappointing, and it's been going on since the Tomb Raider reboot. And then you'll look and they'll have sold like 8 million copies or something silly like that, and it just makes you wonder, like, is Square a giant money laundering operation? Like, what are their budgets that, like,
I've actually heard a take on that as well.
Yeah, I've never understood it, but they've been doing it for years. Now Deus Ex is on ice. I'm glad that they're being released. Like, I'm very excited because the Deus Ex series is, like, really dear to me. I pretty much wanted to make Mankind Divided, like, my entire personality as a grown adult. And so I'm happy to see it, like, leaving and maybe going somewhere where it can live again. But it's just so this fire sale of IPs like that just feels very significant coming around the bend of like these really big fat acquisitions. So quickly we've turned into like selling Bored Apes for $150 and Deus Ex for a penny.
Well, I also saw like some memes saying like, oh, so they sell Tomb Raider on these IPs, but then Square is also saying that they want to consolidate to focus on crypto or whatever.
I mean, I saw that too.
So the tinfoil theory that I heard was that they created a narrative in Japan that all of the other studios were doing terribly, Deus Ex, Tomb Raider, so that the developers of like Final Fantasy 14 on its initial release that did so horribly could save face by comparison. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty tinfoil, right?
Oh, I love it. I love it. That's what live podcasts are for. I would buy it. I mean, you got to have somebody to kind of tank the blame.
Yeah.
I mean, the pipeline on a lot of their games is just famously long and storied. I mean, Final Fantasy, what became Final Fantasy 15 eventually a few years ago was, what was it? It was like Fabula Nova Crystallis Final Fantasy 13 in like 2006, and then it finally released like 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, they had some long runners there, like Duke Nukem level,
Right.
And so you gotta push that off onto somebody.
And so when the entire studio doesn't do well in a financial year or quarter or whatever, and they're like, well, who's to blame? Well, we can't blame our Japan studios. We have to blame the European and the North American ones.
Yeah.
Right, as a priority. So if they get thrown under the bus, and it doesn't add up, like you were saying, it's like 8 million copies. Terrible.
Yeah.
You're just like, wait, what?
I'm making that up, but I remember generally being confused because that same press release about not meeting expectations happened multiple times, and these were like fairly critically well-reviewed games.
Right.
I don't
By
think
the way, we got an update from Candace.
Yeah.
She said that she broke the build.
Oh, Jesus.
The red MMO build. So she had to go back to the office. So.
So that's canceled. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. That's it. The last change. Anywho, recession-wise, I'm just trying to play out in my head what it looks like to continue to work in the game industry as things start to tighten up.
Yeah.
Thinking about how the environment for a game developer starts to look as the recession goes on, because we've had like a year-ish, a year and a half of this like very kind of talent-driven, fight for your perks, fight for remote, get more pay, hop around kind of environment for people. And it feels like it's starting to turn on a dime. And I wonder if you think as a developer, that is like, you think that that environment's going to change as well? Is the power sort of shifting back into the hands of the market as opposed to the talent as things start to get tighter? Like, what do you foresee happening? You don't need to tell us like how you're planning on cutting all future Noto salaries by 50%, because like, take it or leave it.
No. It's just hard to say. It's hard to predict. Certainly, the recession is really being driven by speculation. It's driven by speculation that interest rates will increase. There are talks of that their interest rates may increase to a certain amount. No one knows what it is. So a lot of things are being, affected by speculation, and that's normal. Kind of like if we look from the past and how it usually shakes up. I think it was we've had from the past year since COVID, there was like what they call the Great Resignation, where so many people left their jobs to different jobs, or maybe I think 30% of the people who left their jobs started to work for themselves and just built their own kind of freelance thing. But the people who kind of left jobs to go to other ones, they got there was so much capital out there that employees saw like raises and more benefits, and they were able to work from home full remote. Like basically it was the time for an employee to get to move ahead and get better terms or a better job and stuff. Now that we're going to a squeeze, I think some of that will be pulled back. I think there's more leverage for the employer to kind of set more terms, and certainly if there's layoffs or if there's like hiring, I'm pretty sure pretty much almost every company will start to kind of hone down how many employees are going to start hiring for, just because for contingency of how the economy could go. Again, speculation of how the economy could go. And so my main kind of thought is just that for an employee looking to move around and stuff like that, I think the market is going to be different, and I think you're not going to get as high offers, and it's just not going to be as lucrative as it was in the past year or so. Yeah, and the other thing, chatter I've been hearing is other people at other companies who are larger, they're looking at their RSUs. Typically a lot of companies, they give you stock, shares of the company and what's called restrictive stock units, so you get some of the equity of the company that unlocks over time. like Google or Facebook or whatever, and they're all kind of looking at that, saying, "Okay, next quarter you'll get this amount," but it's all like dropping because the market's dropping, and so they're reshifting compensation packages. A lot of companies from equity to more just flat like just liquid compensation, right? Just cash. And so you'll see that a bit at some companies who are looking to retain people. Yeah, so the larger incumbents are going to have a little more challenges at retaining people if the kind of equity, what they call the golden handcuffs, become less enticing.
Yeah, you would think that would benefit talent, right? Because if you can only hire one guy, whereas you could hire three people before, you want that one slot to be filled by the very best. So the more talented you are, the better,
Mhm.
more you're going to thrive. But I I don't have much faith that most companies out there are good at spotting talent, recognizing talent.
No,
So
yeah, especially in
who
our
knows,
industry, it's really,
right?
really hard to know if someone is good or not.
Right.
Um,
Well, I kind of memed on it before because obviously y'all released Wrath of the Lich King right around the time that Lehman Brothers went down. So Blizzard was doing pretty well, but like, do you recall any actual knock-on effects from the last recession taking hold at like what was a very successful company at the time? Like, what about the narrative of we're heading into lean times managed to rock the company? Like, that's around the time where they let all those GMs go, right? There was a huge layoff around then. Was that recession related at
oh, at
all?
Blizzard? At
Yeah, yeah,
Blizzard?
yeah, yeah. Was it around
Um,
2008? There was like a couple hundred support
yeah.
staff, I think, that all got let go around the same time. It made
Yeah,
news.
it was a lot of it was a lot of support staff. Before that they moved a lot of the support staff to Austin, to
Hmm.
Texas, and then there are still, I guess, some remaining ones that they still at the company, and that was like one of the first people to kind of go. But kind of what you're talking about, Luca. I think a lot of the people that they laid off at that time were just sort of just fat that they felt like weren't really, I remember. I think kind of what someone told me is, and I've never been a lead at Blizzard, or whatever, so I'd never managed anyone. But what I heard, is that basically all the different departments were told, "Hey, if there's anyone in the company you thought is not performing or you'd like to get rid of, let's throw them into this layoff bucket," right? And that's what they did. So,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like there was a time before that where the game exploded, so that basically if you had a pulse, you could be a GM, right? The demand was so high, the need was so high that I bet a lot of people got in that weren't particularly good, and so a couple of years later, they're still there, but they're still not great.
yeah,
This is an opportunity to throw them in that bucket, as it were.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the assumption on, from the community standpoint, the assumption is always every person being laid off is this hardworking, exemplary employee, right? But yeah, that's not actually reality.
Oh, no, no. When I was let go, I was not performing. But I really just
Yeah, same here.
I fucking disliked where I was. I was just like aggressively
Mhm.
trying to get fired. It's better than quitting, as it turns out. So
Yeah, yeah.
So I get it, and I don't always feel like, oh, it's the big mean companies letting people go. I mean, plenty of people just
Mhm.
like need to be let go or are asking to be let go,
Mhm.
but they have to get fired instead of quit because the American healthcare and unemployment system is the way that it is.
Right.
And but I don't know, Chris, you're usually pretty good at this, so I was wondering, like, can you sort of unspool like the adult world narrative that is, it's okay for companies to do a big firing because you can point to the recession and say, now is the time to do it. Like, what if Blizzard had decided we have these 600 low performers or whatever, even if like times were good? What would have stopped them from like doing a big layoff without the narrative of the economy around it? Like, what do you think? What would like the consequences for a big developer look like then versus the recession?
I mean, it's definitely just an easy excuse that the economy is shifting. Everyone else is doing layoffs. It's just normal, right? So it's definitely an excuse. But I think, what are the ramifications if they just did it like whenever, like let's say
Right.
like 6 months ago? It's just sort of, well, it's hard, even though like in the US, there's what's called at will employment. So the company can get rid of someone whenever they want legally. It's challenge. You have to do a lot of documentation when you do let somebody go and buttress the company against potential lawsuits of like, And that's why, for example, there's what's called a performance improvement program, pipping. It's basically a way for the company to do its, have documentation if you're letting somebody go, that these are the reasons, this is what happened, that we tried to improve them and it didn't work. And just so that if there is a lawsuit to the company, they can protect themselves. And so, especially in California, California is notoriously one of the hardest states to let people go because, if you've seen at Riot, they let some people go and then they got sued for it was people claimed it was a sexual harassment thing or something, which eventually got thrown out of the court, but it still does a lot of damage to the company's image, and everyone reports about it. And no one follows up to find out what really happened. What did the court say? And then, even then, people may not believe them, right? So it's challenging to let people go, especially a lot of people like that in layoffs. The company just has to do a lot of work to document that, right? And so
I guess the smoke screen of there being a recession around it probably just like blunts the wave of lawsuits that might come back from all the people that were let go, because they might feel like, well, I don't think I'll be able to challenge that narrative because everybody knows a recession's afoot, and then that's what they said, so I'm going to have to go against that. Versus like if not a great reason was given and times were good, you'd feel like, oh, like they're gonna be ready to take this case, no problem. Yeah.
But anyway, it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna be a story that we talk about all year. But I didn't want to leave the podcast on this doomer topic. But some people in chat had some question for you, Kevin. Night Stalker wants to know what your thoughts on, what your hot takes are in the new talent system that they talked about. And I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at the announcement for.
Yeah, I haven't looked in detail. I definitely feel like I've turned a corner with WoW because I didn't even watch the cinematic. Like, I've always paid at least cursory attention to the new thing, but this time, I just didn't. I was not motivated to. I've heard, like I streamed the other night, and a lot of people were asking me a lot of questions and telling me some of the stuff that's going on. So I think talent systems are cool. I mean, they're definitely great, but I don't know. I feel like it's one of those distractions, like in terms of what I think is going on with WoW and the trajectory it's on. Like, there are so many like fundamental issues that they have to look at and try to address that, saying we're going back to a talent system or saying things like we're getting rid of borrowed power doesn't mean a whole lot. Those feel more like PR hits than like reasons for everyone to get super excited about the future of WoW. Because I think like whether or not there's a talent system or not is really incidental to the success of, WoW going forward. I think they have a lot of much bigger problems to solve.
Yeah, I think it's not like, oh, it's going to save the game or something like that. I think it's like, it is like one piece that could affect gameplay and improve the core experience for sure. I mean, on full disclosure, that was the system I was working on before I left. It was something I pitched to the.
Nice.
I wanted to do it before the previous expansion, but then they ended up doing a different system. But full disclosure, I mean, this system that they're doing now is different. Like, it's a different design than mine that I pitched, but kind of the goals I think are the same. Is just like it's been a thing that players talk about a lot, that the current talent system is just too shallow and they want something a little more interesting.
Right.
But and so I think that, like you said, I think you're right that it's not necessarily a bad thing to focus on, but it's not going to just drastically change the game.
And that's and that's one of the issues, right? Is like let's say you were still there, it would be your job to do the best you could with what's within your scope, right? Of what you can control. So you going like, okay, it's time to bring talents back and knock it out of the park with talents and make them awesome, and everyone's going to love it. And you do your job, 100%, and you do it wonderfully, and everybody loves that one particular part. And each person is sort of doing that in their own little space. But all of those things together, I still think the game would still struggle because there's just so many bigger picture issues. Right. Like it can't be fixed by making each one of these little pieces, 10 or 20 or 30% better.
Yeah, and personally, both of us have worked on talent systems many times, on the game. It's just the challenge is not, I mean, one of the things is the structure of the talent system, but the other is really the talents, right? And that's the hard part, is making something that is exciting, fun, has multiple uses in different parts of the game, and is plays to the class's fantasy. It's really hard to make good talents, and so
and also in the environment where you can change them on the fly at any point. Like, because a big part of like the talent system being interesting is that it's a compelling choice because you have to stick with it for at least a little bit of time.
Yeah, and so that will be the challenge. Yeah, so the proof is going to be in the pudding of what those talents are. So we'll have to see, right? But
exactly.
Yeah.
But also, like, one good thing is that because they've taken a time out with talents, like, they can bring them back in a new, like, a fresh way. Because, like, the old talent system, if it have been allowed to just continue growing all through all of the expansions to date, would be an absolute mess, right? Like, the old talent system in terms of structure was not sustainable.
No,
we were already pushing it in Wrath, and it was already going to be a mess in Cataclysm. So, the fact that they can sort of reboot it can bring back some of that freshness because, again, systemically, it's way stronger when you first release it than it is 2-3 expansions later.
Right. Yeah, everything goes in waves. I saw a $45 vintage No Fear t-shirt in a streetwear boutique in Montreal a couple days ago.
Wow.
So it's back. Yeah.
Only $45. Okay, so another question was on Ubisoft. Microsoft rumor that is going around lately about senior devs leaving and Ubisoft shutting down online services for many games. I saw the thing about Ubisoft shutting down services, but they're for games that are like really, really old, like 20 or 10 years old, that probably have like 6 people playing at any given time. If anybody's playing it. I think it's just basically they're consolidating that kind of probably the shards of servers that are spin up for those different things. Makes sense. Like, hey, if no one's playing it, whatever. So I don't know if that's indicative of Ubisoft dying, but I have heard, I've known people from Ubisoft who have been unhappy for a long time, and a lot of people in the last couple of years have left, and a lot of them have been going to different startups or to other companies. I think a lot of startups actually from Ubisoft that are trying to do new things. So yeah, I think Ubisoft, for me as a gamer, I don't really play a lot of Ubisoft games. I think they're always kind of feel like soulless to me, and kind of like they're highly produced and they have like a budgets, and a lot of times I'm looking at the trailers like, wow, that's a really cool cloth simulation they have. Like all that stuff is cool, but I always think the soul of the game, like the actual game, this never hooks me.
Yeah. After sports titles, they're like easily, I think, the most annualized titles that AAA gamers experience. Like they started churning out Assassin's Creeds, etc., Far Cry's, like very quickly once they hit upon the formula, right? And I think people are pretty exhausted by it.
Yeah, Ubisoft is like, we could have a whole podcast on it, on that topic of that history of that studio. They have a lot of fascinating things. Like one thing is, in Canada, the government supplements a lot of the salaries of the developers at Ubisoft, and so I have a lot of friends who became game devs just because the studio was just like, hey, you have a pulse, get into Ubisoft.
Dude, I used to work for not Ubisoft, but one of the Guillemot brothers, right, at a sister company called Longtail Studios that eventually Ubisoft acquired, and our company was failing horrendously. We were making like basically the story-focused version of Warcraft, Arclight, Rumble that is bloated mobile games that took like 5 years to put out, and we're just hemorrhaging money. All of us at the studio, this is the one I got laid off from, we had like no morale after a while. We were convinced we were just somehow a tax write-off for like the main Ubisoft studio because all those brothers worked together. And like we had a studio in Quebec City, and the province was paying for basically 70% of a programmer's salary to throw somebody up there, like you're saying. But just as soon as the trade wind shifted, they opened another studio in Charlottetown in Prince Edward Island. And then when that changed, they opened a different studio in Halifax. Like these people, it feels a bit like when you want to talk about like taxing the rich and how they'll just go somewhere else. Like these folks will just fully uproot and like build a fresh studio with fresh bodies wherever there's cheap government money. It doesn't really make for like a long-term really healthy kind of culture or a company identity. But
Mhm.
I would love to do an entire podcast on that because that stuff is all just like declassified for me at this point. I don't think any vestiges of it exist anymore. But most interestingly, I remember when they did one, speaking of layoffs, they did a layoff at the studio in which employees' names were put up on a piece of paper on the wall, the people who were staying, and everybody else was gone. They did that in the Quebec studio. So that
Oh
still
boy.
happens.
No slack, huh?
Yeah. Secondly,
Yeah.
secondly, a lot of people were let go because of rumblings of folks beginning to discuss a union at one point, and they just basically became like unpersons and just like
Mm.
exited the company. So fun times. I look forward to the Ubisoft episode.
Yeah. And then Luca, you DM'd me this question somebody had about
Yeah,
my
from Mo.
interactions with Adham. Yeah, I don't. I did have a good experience with Adham. I worked with him briefly when I was pitching a game internally in the studio, in their incubation department, and I worked with Adham on that, and I really liked him. And just generally, there's nothing in particular that I could point to that was like, oh, he's great. It's conversationally, I could tell he got it, and he understood games. He understood what the culture of Blizzard was about. He understood, I don't know. He just had this kind of sensibility about him, and conversationally, I liked him, and I just thought, man, it would have been awesome if I could have worked with him,
Mhm.
if in the beginning or whatever. Like,
He was a real
but
one.
yeah. So,
Okay.
I mean,
Reynolds
Kevin
is-
probably has more interactions with Adham
Yeah,
than I
I've
do.
tons
So,
of interactions with them. Yeah.
I don't know if you want to go into those now, but Reynolds has patiently had his hand up for a minute, and I was
oh,
waiting
go
for one
ahead.
of you
Let's do
to
it.
page him up because I don't like doing it with the overlay. But what's up, Reynolds?
Hey guys,
What up?
doomers. So I had a question along that line, like with the economy downturn. I wanted to see, do you guys see like a silver lining, perhaps? To is there any correlation, or is there none? To because I think you guys had said you have been through recessions and downturns in the past. With the consolidation and maybe a fresh approach, does that happen? Maybe not in larger companies, but in smaller ones. Is there like a silver lining of innovation or drive because the competition and the stakes are higher? And is there something there that's like positive that we could get from a potentially shitty situation?
Yeah, I think there are. So again, like the hope is that not everyone gets funding. Like when everyone gets funding, then you're getting all kinds of games, and those games are all of varying quality, and there's a lot more like garbage, released to the market. Theoretically, quality goes up. You have to be more tight with your budget. That may not always translate well because again, like how good venture capitalists are at identifying a gem versus a turd that's going to get polished. I don't know that I have a lot of faith in, but so that's one side that could potentially be good. The other side is people won't spend as much money to prove their concepts. So you'll see a lot more kind of indie type development, which I think of what we've seen in the last 5 years is that some of the best designs have come from the indie space and done on the cheap, right? So we might see more people leaning into gameplay first and game design first, and not so much on millions and millions in assets and fancy code to show people's hair flowing in the wind perfectly, right? So that could be a positive.
Yeah, I mean, every time, essentially the recession, it's just a product of the capital market that we have. It's just what happens is, a lot of the venture capital is given to a bunch of companies, and a lot of bets are made, and then a lot of larger companies are just running on that, and then at some point there's a recession and it consolidates, and some of the wacky companies, like if you remember, like the tech company pets.com or whatever, back in the tech boom, like a lot of these things you scratch your head and go, "Oh, what the hell, whoever funded that?" Or like, what was the point of that company or whatever. All of those kind of like fall to the wayside, and then only the strong survive. And so kind of like what Kevin's saying, like a lot of like the shovelware games that you probably heard that maybe have gotten funded or that are going to market, or some of the other companies are releasing. Some of those companies will just kind of, unfortunately, maybe fold or get bought or something like that, and you'll get only the the strong will survive in terms of good games with good gameplay. So
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how this Discord, I don't want to speak for everybody in terms of how we feel about NFTs, but I think it would be extremely unlikely for a concept such as NFTs and hybrid NFTs to have emerged in a recessionary time. So those conditions, I think, can be good for forcing, actual good ideas to get funding and people to like really dig in and gain traction. There's less. I think my take, and I don't really have any figures to back this up, but I think that when there's a lot of money floating around and everybody feels like they can get theirs in the market and start whatever they want, people tend to operate just kind of hunting where the money is. And so there's a lot more movement around. And I think that people tend to want to be a little more cautious during a recession. They may not leave a job because they don't know that another one's going to be waiting for them immediately. And this isn't great for people that are actually stuck in horrible fucking toxic work environments and now don't have options. But I do think that there's a cohort of people that for whom actually sticking around at a developer and not just FOMOing onto like whatever the next job is can be a really good thing. I think there's something to be said for digging in, committing, and trying to get through the hard times and prove something out. Like a little grit is, not something to be feared, I think. So,
and then also it funnels developers into projects that the market wants, and so that's good for everybody, I think, even if there's pain along the way. But anyways, I got to get going soon because my battery is 2%.
Yeah. 2%? Wow,
we did
so
it.
Close. Yeah, okay. That's the new hourglass on podcast is Chris's laptop battery.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thanks for coming. We will see you again in probably 2 weeks. Kevin should be back with us. Leave more questions and comments in the channels. And Chris, you want to send us out, or are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah?
All right. Well, later, gamers.